Eon Fable, Chapter of Water. So here I am, standing at the end of this great big cliff, overlooking the ocean. I never saw the ocean before. I heard it mentioned in some storybooks, but I never got to see it with my own eyes until now. I almost expected it to look like one of those ponds from the forest, all smooth and still on top, except bigger. But it looked pretty rough to me, like a river. I thought that was weird because I always thought rivers flowed downhill, but the ocean was just flat, so I didn't understand why it would be flowing anywhere. I heard somewhere that all the rivers and creeks in the world flowed into the ocean eventually, so I didn't get why the ocean was still flowing when the water had nowhere to go. But there were waves all over the ocean like fish scales, and they were all coming towards the shore. It sounded like thunder when they hit the bottom of the cliff, and it looked kind of like a giant bonfire when the waves hit, sending lots of embers into the air. And it smelled like salt. The smell got into my nose and my throat, and it wouldn't go away. It got into my eyes, and it started making them water. But it was pretty. There was nothing as far as I could see. Just water and sky. Even the ocean was emptier than the sky was. The sky had lots of streaky clouds. And I saw the moon, too. I like how the moon comes out during the day sometimes. It's funny. But the ocean was just plain. There wasn't anything there, just water and a weird reflection of the sun. And for some reason, I thought that was pretty. Like, if you went out there and got away from all the wingles on a boat or something, it would be really peaceful and no one would bother you. There was a water monster standing next to me on the cliff. He said he was a feral gator. Big, blue, spiky guy. He had a mouth that could probably eat me in one bite if he wanted to. But I wasn't scared of him. He was the one who took me to live with him in the city next to the ocean. He brought me here to show me the seaside because he thought it would make me happy. He says, "So what is your name again?" "It was Jasmine," I told him. I don't know why he forgot my name. I remembered his. It was Brunt. "Jasmine. I think you must be the 15th one I've seen in my life with that name. It's getting pretty old. Parents should really start trying to be more original with naming your kids." Well, yeah, like I had anything to do about that. I say, "Well, there's 18 of us, and Grandpa named us all after flowers. He said he wanted all of us to have names that were different colors." Fair enough. I guess it could have been worse. He could have named you after gemstones. I didn't like Brunt just yet. He wasn't like Grandpa, and I didn't think he would make a good replacement for him. He was more like Clover. I never got along with Clover. But Brunt said he would pay me if I would help him do his job. I thought if I could make a living here, I could figure out why Grandpa sent me here and figure out what kind of story he wanted me to write. I stared at the ocean for a long time, but I tried not to look straight down the cliff. I was scared of heights. Whenever I would look down, I thought I could feel the rock starting to crack underneath me, like a dead tree branch, the kind I broke when I tried to climb a tree the first time. But it went away again when I looked at the ocean, and the way it turned into the sky far in the distance. After a little while more, Brunt says, "So, Jasmine, what do you know about the sea?" That it's big? It was the only thing I could think of. Brunt looks at me like I'm crazy, and then he says, "You're about to become a Vaporeon, and you don't even know anything about the ocean." I look back at him and say, "What's a Vaporeon? A sailor like you?" Honestly, it's silly, but I didn't know anything about evolving at the time. I know a few of my brothers and sisters figured out the secrets of eons from the library, or from the elders or the villagers, but I wasn't one of them. I never really liked reading, and I didn't pay much attention to my tutoring when they talked about eons. I thought they were completely different creatures. Many of the siblings were the same. They didn't know either, but our ignorance really came back to bite us, I guess. Or at least it did to me. Nowadays, I think maybe Grandpa didn't tell us on purpose. I think he wanted us to find out about evolving on our own. It was part of our story. So, yeah, now Brunt's looking at me all flabbergasted. He yells at me, "If you got no idea what a Vaporeon is, then what in Kyogre's wide realms are you doing with the Eon Stone?" I remember the stone. I sit down on my tail, and I place a paw on the gem on my chest. It was the blue stone that I had picked up on the night of the campfire. Grandpa put it in a chain link holder thing that harnessed around my neck and behind my front legs. It's so snug that I forgot it was even there most of the time. I tell him, "Grandpa gave it to me. I picked it because I like the color. I don't really know what it is. He just told me to keep it forever." So Brunt tells me. He crouches down and touches the front of the gem with his claw. "This is your ticket to the depths of the great big ocean out there, my dear," he says. "It's an evolving stone. It has the power to permanently change the shape of your body into something that swims. And swims blasted well, might I add. We Mons all need to evolve sometime, or most of us at least, but you Eons take your evolving extra seriously. So your kind took the normal evolving stones and made these. They're crazy rare. They only work for Eons. They're special because they don't work until you recite a chant of some sort, so you'll never evolve on accident." I frowned at him, not understanding. "A chant? What is it?" I asked. He stared into the sky and started rolling his eyes side to side. "Oh, it's something like cheapo. I don't know. I'm really sorry, kid, but I'm no Eon. I've only ever seen the phrase in writing. I'd have to look it up again sometime to refresh my memory." I still didn't get it. There was a chant? Something I could sing to the stone that would change me? Change me into something that could swim? I could already swim a little. At least I could paddle on the surface of the water in the ponds and rivers back home. I didn't know about the ocean, though. The ocean looked a little harder to swim across. I still didn't understand why I would be expected to swim in the ocean. Brunt sailed on a boat. Couldn't I just ride on that? That was the first time I realized that Grandpa wanted me to change. He wanted me to use that stone that would change my form into something else. Forever. I just kind of felt uneasy, and I didn't know what to say. Actually, I was pretty scared right then and there. I thought I could hear the stones cracking underneath me again, but it was only the waves from down below. I felt weak, and I shivered a little. I told Brunt, "I don't want to change." He scoffs at me and says, "You Eons are all the same, you know. If you really don't want to change, I'll gladly take that stone of yours back. Just don't expect to see another one for as long as you live, alright?" I couldn't do that. Grandpa told me to keep it. Then he stands back up and he says, "Fortune has smiled upon you, my dear. And that fortune is the sea. You best start learning to do the best with what you've got. That's what life's all about, anyway." I asked if we can leave. I don't want to look at the sea anymore. I'm starting to get sick. So he takes me back to the town. It's called Port Craw. It's a big place, so much bigger than the village that was outside of my forest back home. There aren't any gardens or grass or trees anywhere I can see. It's just stone and wood and iron. The ground is made of a bunch of gray, beady rocks, and so many of the houses are too. And it's really busy. There are crowds of creatures running everywhere. All sorts of kinds I've never seen before. Many of them look like they're really out of their elements. Like they really should be living in a forest, like the one I'm from. I start wondering if they all like it here, or if they hate it. There's no nature anywhere. Well, except for the ocean. You can see the ocean from almost anywhere in town. I look at the ocean one more time as I'm following him. The sun is setting over the ocean. It makes the ocean look even more pretty. Brent takes me to his home, which is a really small box made of wooden planks. He lets me in, and I see that it's only a few rooms large. There are some rugs and benches and shelves, but our den had those too. I thought such a big monster would live in an even bigger home, but I'm seeing it's really cramped in here. The floor creaks underneath him as he walks. I begin to wonder where I'm supposed to go. I crawl over to the little rug made of ropes and I sit down. It's not very comfortable, but I don't want to touch anything in the house if Brunt doesn't want me to, so I stay put and watch him. It smells like salt in here, I tell him. It was annoying. I thought the smell would go away when we went inside. He walks around into a storage room and opens a freeze box. It's full of dead fish. He takes one and sets it on a bench. He also pours some colorful water into an open orb of glass. Ah, yes. Salt and seafood. Seafood and salt. Stay around Port Craw long enough and those will be the only 2 cents that'll ever bring you comfort again, because they mean your home. I didn't agree. The sense of my home were the things I wouldn't forget. The honeysuckles in the spring, the loose pollen, and the dried leaves in the fall that would make me sneeze, and the spicy pine sap in the winter. Those were the real sense of home to me. With this smell of salt and fish everywhere, I couldn't really smell anything else. And foxes are supposed to be known for their sense of smell, so that's really saying something. But I don't say that because I don't want to be rude. He asks me if I want anything. I ask if he has any milk. He says, "Sorry, but we generally don't keep milk around these parts. It's expensive and it goes bad way too quickly. Not to mention it doesn't go well with fish." He sets a bowl of water in front of me and asks me to try not to spill any on the rug. He asks if he should skin a fish for me, but I just sigh and say I'm not hungry. I look at the little bowl and I realize I'm not really thirsty either, but I don't say that either because I don't want to be rude. "Well, you need to eat something at least. I can't have you running around out of steam when we go to work tomorrow." I don't want to work. I just really don't. I don't know what he expects me to do. I'm just a little girl. I haven't done any work harder than cleaning up the forest patio when it was my turn to do it, or bringing stuff in from town for Grandpa. I really don't know how I can help this big monster with his boat. He sits down at the bench and he looks at his dinner. Then he looks at me. I ask him what work will be like. He starts to use his claws to cut off the scales of the dead fish. "Well, I need a strong young Vaporeon to help me make shipments across the ocean. You'd be in charge of shackling the anchors and helping move the supplies through the water. Of course, I could do it without a Vaporeon, but I'd rather not. It'd take 2.5 longer. I ask him why he couldn't just use someone else as a partner. "Well, you're strong, you're fast, you're small, and you've got limbs. There aren't very many water types with your credentials. Only thing better for the job would be a marsh tom, but they're even rarer on account of you never being able to get one who doesn't want to evolve as soon as possible." I gawk at Brunt as he starts picking off the fish meat from the bones and eating it raw. I've never had raw fish before. I've eaten some meat raw, but never fish. It just seems gross. Grandpa and Granny always cooked the fish for us. We'd always catch some in the lake, and they'd set it on some coals and brown it with some chives for flavor. It was also weird to see because he had such a big mouth and he was picking the meat off the bones like it was grapes. He could even have eaten the whole fish at once with the jaw he has. He keeps talking with his mouth full. He says, "Of course, I prefer a Vaporeon for their other qualities. You have a certain affinity with the water that you can't quite find among common folk. When you've got a Vaporeon with you, the sea just seems to do what you want in unexplainable ways." I look away from his mouth so I don't see him chewing his food. I ask him if he already has a Vaporeon that he works with. He seemed to know what they're like. "Used to. I had a partner for a little under a decade, but he retired just last month. I was thrilled to have your grandfather offering me to send you as a new recruit. That's why I sold him the stone of yours. We made a deal. I'd give him the Eon stone, and he'd send back to me whomever uses it. I was badly in need of help, so I took the offer on a heartbeat." He gave me a tomato. It was a little soft, but it wasn't rotten yet, so I tried to eat it without getting the juice everywhere. He said he didn't have very much on hand besides fish and fermented elixir, but he said once I got money from working, I could buy whatever I wanted from the markets. After I was done, I asked him if I could take a bath. He looked at me all weird, like he didn't know what a bath was, but he had a barrel that looked like it was cut in half, and he filled it with water for me and put it out behind the house in the alley. I didn't really like that bath. Somehow it made me feel even dirtier, and it made me miss the river next to my home. And it was really cold water. But I got all the tomato off my face, and I licked all the salt dust off of my fur. Or at least I did my best. It was annoying having the gem harness still attached to my chest. Then I just sat in the barrel for a while and stared at the sky. I could see some of the stars from between the houses, just like how I used to be able to see them from between the trees. At least they looked like the same stars. It was the only thing so far that stayed the same. After that, I climbed out of the barrel and I shook off as much water as I could. Then I clawed at the door until Brunt let me back in. I felt like sleeping. I was going to ask where I could sleep, but before I could say something, Brunt says, "Hey, I found it!" He sets down an open book on the floor in front of me. On one page, there was some big words in black ink. I looked at the words. They say, "Spell for the Eon Stone. Acipio mutatio." He smiles and says, "There, just say that word." I don't dare say that word. He says, "Well, what are you waiting for?" He looks really excited, but I just turn away and stare at the floor. I ask him where I can sleep. "Oh, come on now. Don't leave me in suspense. Can't you just say the word? You might like what happens." I start to feel very dark and my legs feel heavy. I don't say anything. I just keep staring at the floor. I feel like asking him to go away, but I don't want to be rude. So I just don't say anything. My dear, those are cold feet of yours, and they're not going to get you anywhere in life. But I understand. Perhaps another day. He takes the book away, and he gets me a brown basket and puts some kind of a green cushion on it. It smells like sheep. Sorry, I'm not so good with this hospitality stuff. I spend most of my time on the old Caldeo after all. But I hope this will be comfortable for tonight. Get your rest. I sat down on it, and I put my tail around my face. He puts out the lanterns and walks into another room. The floor still creaks so loudly wherever he walks. And I remember, the pillow was very comfortable, but I couldn't sleep well because I hurt. I just felt like the way I felt when I stepped on a dead branch and fell out of a tree. I felt like I broke my legs and there wasn't anyone around to help me and carry me back home. I tried not to get tears on the pillow. I slept for a long time, but it wasn't very deep. And when I woke up, I didn't know where I was. My dreams made the cabin feel like my family's den, and it was confusing. I couldn't get back to sleep because the sunlight was in the windows. I dropped out of the basket and carefully patted around the room. I didn't see Brunt anywhere, and I didn't hear him walking around. I started to wonder if he left to go get things in town. I decided to explore his house and see all the things he owned. The shelves had some nice things on them, like small seashells that were painted and strung together like jewelry. There were also some metal charms and colored clothes. Some of the things looked very valuable, and some of them looked worthless. I wondered if these were things that Brunt bought with the money he made working on the boat. I saw a few skulls from dead animals, probably sea creatures. I didn't recognize any of them, and I had seen heaps of skulls before because Snap liked to collect them. He collected so many that Grandpa would always tell him to throw some out. But then I found an empty space above the hearth that was supposed to have something on it, but it didn't. There were just a few hooks on the wall that weren't holding anything. I thought that was weird because the rest of the shelves were so full and the wall was so decorated with things completely. Whatever it was small because the hooks were very close together. I looked down underneath the hooks, and there was a fossil. It was a big piece of sandstone with a paw print on it. I put my paw onto it and realized that the paw print was the same shape, but bigger. Then I realized it was probably a fake fossil, because there was an etching on the inside of the rock. It said Lynn. I wondered if Lynn was a Vaporeon that worked with Brunt. I looked at the side of the paw print again. It was really big. I started wondering, if I became a Vaporeon, would my paws become that big too? I remembered the Eon stone again, and I looked down at my chest where it still was. I saw that the metal container for the stone had 4 loops, and they were as far apart as the hooks on the wall were. I realized this was where it came from. The stone really did belong to Brunt. Grandpa had gotten it because of a deal he made, but before that it was hanging on the wall right there. I wondered how long it was there for. Then I hear Brunt coming in the door, and I get off the hearth really quickly. I didn't want him to see me touching his things. I got back down in the basket, and I pretended I just woke up. And he comes in the door. He isn't holding anything, he just comes in the door and looks at me. "Good afternoon, Jasmine. Did you sleep well?" I lie and say yes. "So, do you think you feel like evolving today? I'd be patient, but I'm about to set off with a shipment and I really could use your help. If you evolved, that would just be great." I sigh. I don't feel as bad as I did before I slept, but whenever he talks about evolving, I just feel so uneasy. I say, "What if I don't like being a Vaporeon?" "Well, what if you do? Every Vaporeon I've ever met had no regrets. They really liked it. Of course, I've only ever met the one." I almost growl at him because it wasn't really funny. He stops laughing and he looks close at me. He kneels and he looks at me kindly and he says, "Well, Jasmine, why don't we make this simpler? Can you tell me what's keeping you? What are you waiting for exactly?" I calm down a little, and I try to be honest with him. I say, "I'm trying to figure out if I'll like it or not, I guess." He grins at me. He says, "Well, I've got news for you, my dear. You'll never figure it out at this rate. The only way to find out for sure is to just say the words and evolve. Then, 10 years down the road, maybe you'll finally be able to decide whether or not it was a good choice or not. But that's the thing. It's going to be a blind leap of faith no matter how you look at it. Most things in life are like that. And you can only tell so much about the future before you cross the point of no return. If everyone had the power to go back in time and do things differently, this world of ours wouldn't make much sense now, would it?" "I guess," I said. "Besides, deciding not to evolve is a leap of faith, too. Dare I say, it might be even bigger than evolving. What with all the things the real world throws at you, once you decide to venture out beyond your home pond. As someone who was once a no, I could tell you this." Thankfully, he dropped the topic for a while. He gave me some fruit. I didn't know what kind of fruits they were, but they tasted fine, and they made me full. He had more fish for himself. I wondered if that was the only thing he ever ate. Then he told me we were going down to look at Caldeo, his boat. I followed and stayed close to him while we walked through the town. I was still a little fox compared to the rest of these things I saw around me. I was afraid of getting stepped on. It was such a big city, and there were so many things I didn't understand. There were carts and crates and barrels and marketplaces and gulls in the air, and it all stank of the same fishy salt. I really could not tell any of the creatures apart by their scents. It was that bad. But then, Brunt led me down to the beach. The beach was much simpler. There were some creatures there playing in the shallow water, but mostly it was deserted. The sand sank under my paws whenever I took a step, and it was a little harder to walk than normal. I just followed him down next to the shoreline, trying not to get the water on my paws whenever it came onto the sand. I noticed that it left so much stuff on the shore every time it moved, like seashells and watery knots of plants. As I'm walking and look over the ocean again, I see the piers. They're giant walls that stick up out of the shore and extend over the ocean, like some god just left a big plank in the water and forgot about it. Some of them have boats next to them. I keep hopping over the drifts that Brunt is making with his tail, and I wonder how far we have to walk before we find his boat. I decided to ask him that, but he says, "Actually, before we go to old Caldeo, I had something else in mind that I thought you'd like to do first." And I start thinking it's swimming. Please, please don't let it be swimming. I don't want to swim. The water is so dirty and the waves look so rough. I'd probably drown on the first try. But as I was panicking, thinking about having to swim, that's the moment when my life actually started to change. 'Cause that's when I saw him. there was another creature on the shore with us. At first I ignored him because I thought he was just another kid splashing around in the water. But as he gets closer, I start to see that he's a water monster like Brunt, with kind of the same spikes running down his back. He's walking through the deeper part of the shore and blending in with it really well. Maybe I was just keen because I was a fox, but Brunt didn't notice him until he came out of the water and stood on the beach. That was when I gasped because I realized that he was a fox too, but he was also a fish. He was a fox and a fish at the same time, and I realized that's what a Vaporeon is supposed to be. I kept thinking that I would just get a fin or two and be able to swim a little bit better, but seeing him finally made me understand that it was something much more. My whole form would change, my skin would change color, and I would lose all my fur. I would be so much larger, and I would be a fish, an actual fish. This is so much more for me to take all at once. I just stop walking. Brunt doesn't notice my surprise, though. He seems really happy to see him. He runs ahead and starts saying, "Oh, Lynn, good to see ya. Glad I caught you while you were in Crawdont. Thanks for coming in on such short notice. It's good to see you again, buddy. You haven't grown a bit." Lynn, the Vaporeon, strides through the sand. His fishtail drags behind him and covers up all the paw prints he makes. The whole time, I'm just staring at him, like I can't believe he even exists. He looks nothing like Grandpa, nothing at all. He spoke, and his voice was deep, but dry and grumbly, and I could tell he was old. He said, "You know I spend most of my time in the reef. Where else would you have expected to find me?" Brunt scratches the Vaporeon on the forehead and rubs his back. He says, "Well, the ocean's quite a big place. If you decided to take another one of your little vacations, there'd be no way of knowing." After they talk for a minute, Brunt remembers I'm here. He says, "Lynn, there's someone I'd like you to meet. This is Jasmine. She'll be your replacement aboard old Keldale. Jasmine, this is Lynn, a long-time partner of mine." Lynn the Vaporeon walks up to me with a very deep smile. He bows his head and says, "Good day to you, young lady. A pleasure to meet you." I couldn't respond at first because I was still so mesmerized with his voice and watching all the way his tail and legs moved and wondering how it would feel if I were in that body. But he did look really strong. He was bigger than some of the Darkhounds back at the forest. It actually made me scared a little because he reminded me of them. I finally squeak an answer. I don't remember what I said. "Jasmine is having some reservations about evolving. I was wondering if you'd be willing to talk to her." He looks right at me, and I see that his eyes are completely black. They're like the eyes of a spider, just like they were completely made of ink. He came so close that I could feel him breathing onto me, and I could start seeing into his eyes. They weren't completely black after all. Looking up close, I could see that they were very deep with soft colors. I shivered because I could tell just by looking into his eyes that he was a wise old creature, like the village elders. He looked down at my Eon stone. He smiles at me and he says, "So I see." He says a few things to Brunt, then he turns to me again and says, "Come, Jasmine, walk with me." And I follow him. We walk beside the sea for a while. I'm still looking at him the whole time. I'm amazed that a fox could ever be like a fish. I'm looking at the different shape of his snout and the fins on his head and the different way his legs move compared to other foxes. We walk so far that we actually get to one of the big piers. He leads me underneath it, past the big wooden pillars, and it looks a bit strange underneath. It's mossy down here, and a lot of the wood and weeds have washed up between the rocks. But it's shady and a nice place to relax, although I still feel like holding my breath sometimes because it smells so weird. He jumps up onto a rock and looks at me and curls his tail around his legs, just like a normal fox would do, except it's a fish tail. He says to me, "Jasmine, there's an old poem that I know. I would like it if you would recite the poem with me. Would you do that?" I told him I'd try. "Repeat with me. As surely as the stalk shall sprout and grow." I speak in my feeble little voice compared to his. As surely as the stalk shall sprout and grow, as surely as the sun and stars shall flow, as surely as the sun and stars will flow, with pride I proclaim Acipio mutatio. I bite my tongue before I speak that last line. Lynn shakes his head. No, Jasmine, you must not hesitate. Say it with me as I speak. Now, from the beginning. As surely as the stalk shall sprout and grow. But I'm scared. And I really was, more than ever. I was shaking the same way I shook when I stood on the cliff over the ocean, and I tried to look down and thought the rocks were about to break. I felt like I was about to fall, even though there was no cliff around. I just wanted to scream and hope that someone would catch me. I sat down onto the muddy sand because I couldn't stand up anymore. But Lynn nods, and he says in a really soft voice, "Would you like me to tell you why you are scared?" I nod to him, yes. You are scared because you feel powerless. The world has changed right before your eyes in ways that you have never imagined, and now you find yourself afraid to do anything because you feel small and weakly. You're cowering. You don't know how to take a stand. Lynn jumps down from the rock and looks down at me, and he says, "But you're forgetting something, Jasmine. You are an eon, specially crafted by nature for one purpose, to adapt. No matter what life may do to you, you can stand up and challenge the world on its own terms. Utter the words, and I promise you, you will not be powerless anymore." Yeah, I was cowering, just like he said. I was just sitting there in the mud, and it was getting all over my fur and my paws, but I couldn't stand back up. I just looked at him, but for some reason, I started to trust what he said. I did feel weak, and I really did want to be strong like he was. He walks over to me, and again he comes so close that I can feel his breath, and he puts his head right next to mine, and he whispers. I remembered that his voice sounded just the way the ocean did when the waves came upon the shore. He says, "Do not fear. I am not trying to take anything away from you. I can only promise you one thing. Look out at the sea." I look out past the pier, and I see how the ocean goes far, so far that it turns into the sky. I see boats floating on the ocean far away, and they look so small. When I see how small those boats are, I realize that the ocean is even bigger than I thought. It's not just like a big forest or a mountain. It's big like a sky, the whole sky. Lynn whispers to me, even more quietly. He says, "Jasmine, I promise, if you utter those words, and if you make friends with the sea, no one will ever be able to tell you what to do, ever again. Not me, not Brunt, not anyone, because you can just disappear out there, and no one can catch you. You will be truly free. I know this because I was there, and I still am. I am free. No one truly knows what it means to be free until they have seen the sea the way I have seen it." I listened to him, and I trusted him. I wanted to be free. More than ever, I wanted to be free. I wanted to be free from everyone trying to push me into things I didn't want to do. I wanted to get away and go back to things that were more familiar. He put a paw on my shoulder, and he looked right into my eyes. It was something that Grandpa would do when he needed to talk to me privately. But he was never mean. He always said things that didn't hurt me. And if there was something hard, he would always help me through it and show me what to do. And I guess that's why I put my trust in him. I daydreamed, and I thought I was talking to Grandpa in the shade of the woods. It was such a powerful daydream that for a moment, I thought I wasn't even talking to a foxfish anymore. I just thought I was talking to Grandpa, the one I trusted more than anyone else. And he told me to recite the poem with him again, and I trusted him completely. As surely as the stalk shall sprout and grow. I was hypnotized by his voice, and the way his eyes were so deep. I said it with him. As surely as the stalk shall sprout and grow. He smiled, the way Grandpa would always smile when he was proud of me. And he said, As surely as the sun and stars shall flow. I was happy he was proud of me. As surely as the sun and stars shall flow. With pride I proclaim, Acipio mutatio. As soon as I realized I said those words, all the trust and comfort I felt was gone. I hated him. He tricked me. He betrayed me. He hypnotized me somehow and made me say those words. I knew it. I wanted to attack him. I felt so bad. I felt used. I wanted to scream and cry, but I couldn't move. I felt like I was up to my neck, thick in mud. I closed my eyes. And the dark that usually is behind my eyes just turned white. I could feel the changes happening to me. I kept my eyes closed so tightly. I didn't want to see what was happening. I felt my tail changing and growing longer. I felt my head tingling as my fins grew. I felt my body getting so big that it snapped all the chains that held the Eon stone, and the brace just fell off. Eventually it stopped. But I still had my eyes closed tight. I remember Lynn saying, It's all right, Jasmine. It's all done. And I opened my eyes. The first thing I noticed was that I wasn't looking up to Lynn anymore. I was almost the same level as him. The second thing I realized was that I could smell him. The smells of salt and fish that seemed to be everywhere all around the ocean weren't so bad anymore. I could smell past them and understand things again. I didn't hate him anymore, but I didn't really know what to feel. I felt empty, like all my feelings were just gone. I looked down at myself now that I had a body that belonged to someone else. All my fur was gone. I had blue skin that I guess felt like the surface of a pumpkin or something. My mane was still white, but now it was made of fish fin. It just... I don't know how to describe it. I just knew that I was no longer me. I was someone else. Lynn just said, Congratulations on your evolution. And he smiled. You're beautiful. I stood up and I felt like I was towering over the mud and the sand. Even the broken chain was so far below me. And the mud that had gotten onto my belly didn't make me feel so dirty. Whenever I fell in the mud, I would always have to spend an hour in the stream trying to get it all out of my fur, but now it just kind of slid off me. After that, I wasn't sure what to feel, and I didn't feel like talking all that much. The first time I tried to talk, I made this weird whooping sound that I didn't recognize, and I clamped my mouth shut and didn't say anything else for a long time. Lynn led me back to Brunt, and then he just went away into the ocean. And Brunt took me up the beach so we could get to the top of the piers. It was the weirdest thing when I noticed I could see more of Brunt now. Somehow his head seemed even bigger than before. I walked along behind him and ignored the other creatures I saw. I was just happy that I could still walk. There was this nagging feeling that I was always about to trip and plant my face into the gravel, but I moved my legs in the same pattern I always did, and they seemed to support me. But my tail was another thing altogether. When I looked back at it, it was so long that I thought it was a whole separate creature following me, like it was a snake or something. I wasn't sure how to carry it. I just let it drag along the ground behind me, just like I saw Lynn do. Brunt took me to one of the piers. It was very high, and my fear of heights started nagging me again, so I tried not to look straight down at the water. When he led me onto his boat, I had to walk across this scary bridge that was so narrow and it had no rails, and it was then that my new legs started to get confusing. but I stumbled up the bridge and made it into the boat. Brunt was very happy to show me around the boat. He says, "Welcome aboard Old Keldeo, my freighter. Fully laden, it holds about 58 tons. A little low for the Citra-class vessel, but I swear you've never seen a cleaner cut upon the waves. Yeah, I love her for everything, but most of all, for her speed." He showed me down below in the cabins where the crew lived, and he showed me the cargo room. It was already fully packed with crates and barrels. "We can set off at any time. I was just waiting for you, he says. "When the destination isn't too far, I can pilot her with only my own wits and one assistant." He showed me the big sails that were all wound up on the mast. He showed me the big wooden wheel that he used to steer, and then he showed me over to the side of the boat. There were several strings attached to the boat that ran all the way down to the water. "She's shackled to shore with 5 anchors, Brent says to me. "See those cables? Of course, it's a pain having to reel all of them in every time we land ashore, and it adds to her weight and takes away from her carrying capacity. So here's what I did. I just dropped the anchors at the foot of the shoreline. Just like that, and they stay down there. And those buoys hold up the cables to the surface. What you'll need to do is dive underneath the buoys and unhook those latches so that Keldeo can go free. Then, when we come to port again, chain her back up. Think you can do that for me?" I'm peering over the edge of the boat, and it's a very long way down. I back away from the edge. He says, "Well, let's give her a test run, shall we? Go on, see if you can unhook the anchors." I say, right now?" And I cringe at the sound of my own voice, because it wasn't mine. "Well, yeah. We can sail down the shore. I have some deliveries to make that way out, and we'll only be gone for 3 days. I've got plenty of necessities aboard, so let's make this your maiden voyage, right?" I hiss quietly, and I start looking for a way back down off the ship so I can figure out how to swim and unhook the anchors like he says. He asks me where I'm going, and I tell him this. He's, "Oh, no, come now, dear. There's such a faster way down, And before I know what's happening, he picks me up and throws me off the boat. It was such a long way down that there were a few moments in midair that I realized I was falling. I was so terrified. I reached with all of my paws for something to cling to, and I screamed so loudly. I remember I thought I heard owls, and I didn't realize that it was the sound of my own scream. When I sank underneath the water, I didn't realize it at first. I drew another breath to scream, and I inhaled the seawater into my air lungs. I coughed it back out so violently that I felt like I was actually dying. I remembered the taste of salt that was so strong, and it went all the way down my throat. I thrashed around in the water, but I couldn't seem to find where the air was. I was just blind and helpless, and I was sure I was going to die. I felt Brunt's claw on my belly. He wrapped his arm around me underneath my front legs, and he pulled me up to the surface. Next thing I knew, I was on his shoulder, and I held on so tightly that I started digging into his scales with my claws. I kept coughing up the water, and each time I coughed, it felt like claws were tearing my heart apart. Brunt said, "I learned something new today, that there's a such thing as a waterman who can't swim." After I heard him say that, I don't remember much of what happened. I think I blacked out. And that was the first time I tried to swim as a Vaporeon. I woke up in Brunt's basket with an ache in my head and in my chest. It was the one I slept in the previous night. The basket seemed much smaller to me, but I could still fit in if I curled my tail up tight. My fishtail. I couldn't stop looking at it. I prodded it with my nose and tried to lick it, like I would always do when I would clean my tail, but it didn't feel right. It seemed so weird and slimy. I started to realize I would never have my real tail again, or any of my fur. I was stuck with this fishtail. And when I was thinking about that, it made me hurt. I got really angry. I hated Brunt for throwing me in the water, and I hated Lynn for getting me to say those words. I even hated Grandpa for sending me out here to the sea. I didn't want to be here. I didn't want any of this. My throat hurt and I hacked out some more water. It got all over Brunt's rug. I stepped out of the basket. I saw the sheet pillow that was covered in water stains, and it was still damp. I decided to leave. I tried walking towards the door, but I didn't understand how my body moved. It was much larger than I was used to, and I kept bumping into things. My huge fishtail kept hitting the walls. Well, I didn't care. I was heading for the door. I was leaving. Then I hear a voice saying, "Are you sure you're ready to leave?" I'm frightened and I turn around. Lynn is there. Just right there in the house. And I never noticed him. He was sitting next to the hearth. And my contempt just overflows and I scream at him. I tell him I never wanted to be a Vaporeon. I tell him I never wanted to leave home. I tell him I don't like the ocean. I don't like fish. And I don't like salt. I tell him I want my fur back. I tell him I want my family back. All the while I'm screaming like I'm insane, and my voice just doesn't come out the way I want to because it sounds so different, and I'm jumping around the house in rage and bumping into things. But Lynn just sits there and listens to me without responding. When I feel like I'm running out of breath, I just scream as loudly as I could at the time, and I say, "Why? Why did you trick me? Why did you make me evolve? Why did you promise me that I would be free?" I felt like saying more, but I got raspy again, and I cough up a little bit more water. When I thought I couldn't say anything more, I just fall onto the floor and I glare at Lynn. Lynn waits till I'm done. Then he comes and stands in front of me. And he just says, very calmly, "Because you are free. If you follow me, I can show you." And I can't really explain why I decided to trust him again. Maybe I was just too weak to do anything else. I was weak and cowering, just like always. I didn't know what else to say, so I said yes. He took me to the seaside again. So there I am, standing next to him, looking at the ocean, again. He says, "See how the water is farther away from the beach than it was yesterday? That is called the tide. It happens throughout the day on a fixed schedule. It is useful to know, because as the tide is rising and falling, the current and the undertow change." I ask him where Brunt went. He tells me that Brunt had to go sail his ship without me, and he wouldn't be back for 3 days. And in those 3 days, he would teach me how to swim. He starts by telling me that I can breathe the water just like I can breathe the air, but I need to use my gills to breathe the water. I start trying to paw at my neck to find my gills, but he tells me that the gills aren't like fish's gills. He tells me that they're inside my throat. He says I need to search and find the muscles that control my gills. He says that my throat will block out the water from my air lungs just as it blocks out the food that I eat, as long as I'm using my gills. And then he steps down into the water and tells me to follow him. The water doesn't feel that bad. It's cold, but it's a comfortable sort of cold. The way the water is always moving and little waves are hitting me even feels kind of nice. I just can't shake the feeling that I'll need to spend all day sunbathing to dry out my fur again. Then he just keeps walking, and I'm following, and suddenly I feel the ground start to drop out from under my feet. I was going to panic, but then I remembered that I could paddle. And I did. I treaded water and kept my head well above the surface, and I held my breath whenever a wave would try to splash water onto my face. So I'm thinking, okay, so far this isn't so bad. Lynn even seems happy for me. Then he tells me to try breathing the water. He tells me to go all the way under the surface and try to use my gills. That's a bit harder to do. I learned about what drowning is early in my life, that old instincts are hard to overcome, but I told myself I was a fish now, and I could do it. I cringed really hard and closed my eyes, and I put my face beneath the surface. Then I took a mouthful of the cold, salty water and tried to figure out what to do with it. But then there was a reflex reaction, and the water just it disappeared. My mouth was empty again. I opened my mouth and swallowed more water, and I just lost track of where it went. I felt it going down my throat, but I wasn't choking. That made me feel more comfortable. I took a big sigh of relief, underwater, and it actually worked. I opened my eyes, and it tingled with cold at first, but then it felt perfect. There was nothing wrong with the water. I paddled down under the surface of the water and looked at the sand. There were things sticking out of it, and I think some of them were alive, but I didn't know what they were. I just started following the sand as it kept sloping down. It was hard to see underwater at first, and even harder to move, but I finally made my peace with the water, and proved that I could swim. Lynn was following me. He watched me swim deeper down and see the things beneath the water for the first time. I didn't realize it, but we were very far from the shore by that time, and there was a lot of space around to swim in. I got bored of looking at the shells and the seaweed, and I turned to him. When Lynn spoke, I was surprised that I could hear him so well. The water made weird sounds in my ears and blocked out all the sounds from above the surface, but Lynn's voice seemed clear. Like we weren't even in the water at all. He says to me, "Very good. Now, I want you to do a few things for me. First, I want you to stop moving." I did so. I relaxed all my muscles and I let the water carry me back and forth, up and down. Then he says, "Now, I want you to stop breathing." That surprised me. I thought, stop breathing? That went against every instinct I had, but I gave it a try and I held my breath. It was like a dream. I was floating there completely limp, held by the water, just letting it move me and pull me around without fighting it. And I stopped breathing. And it didn't feel bad. I didn't feel like I would start suffocating. All I could feel was the sound of the waves and the sound of my own heartbeat. It was surreal. It really felt like many dreams I've had in my life until then. I started to learn that the water didn't want to hurt me. I see Lynn swimming in front of me, dashing and striding so smoothly and quickly around in the water. He looks at me and says, "Do you want to know why you don't need to breathe anymore? Because you've already taken in enough water to last you a while. Most water types can hold 4 times their body mass in water, and you keep it in your very soul. It ceases to exist in the physical realm until you need to use it again. When you come to need more water, you'll know." "I keep it in my soul?" I say, and I hear my voice so clearly through the water, just like his. He says, "It is unexplainable, but so are the many things in this world. I'm going to show you something else that is difficult to explain. I'm going to teach you how to truly swim." Lynn disappears behind me, but I don't follow him with my eyes. I just keep drifting in place, not moving, not breathing. I wait for his words. He says to me, "When you thrust your limbs against the currents, don't try to propel yourself forward. It's not necessary. The ocean can do it for you. Pretend that the water, which touches and surrounds you, is under your command, like an extension of your body. When you paddle, it is merely a gesture, telling the water which direction you want to be sent." That was the last moment before I understood what my new body was really like. When I evolved, I had grown up on the outside, and here I was about to grow up on the inside too. So I'm still floating and trying to understand what Lynn is talking about, gesturing to the water, and I'm looking out across the ocean floor. The sand just keeps going down and it gets dark, and the sun looks very strange from underneath the water. The sunlight turns into bubble shapes on the sand, which are always changing. I'm wondering if I should go forward into the dark. And Lynn just says, "Go on, Jasmine. Swim for me. Wherever you want to go, ask the water to take you there. The water likes you. It'll do what you want." And so I try. I give the water a little stroke with all 4 of my limbs, like I was just hinting at the water that I wanted to go forward. And in my mind, I was pretending that there was a spirit in the water, and that it would hear me if I asked for help. And the water took me forward a few feet. I went much further than I thought I would go, with just the little swimming motion that I had made. I started to understand Lynn. I knew I wasn't swimming under my own strength. I knew there was a spirit there in the water, or something. Maybe it was my own spirit. Maybe that's just what Vaporeon are like. Lynn says, "Good, keep going." So I do so. I nudge the water again, and it moves me even further forward. I feel it rushing past me like the hard currents of the streams after it would rain in the spring. I felt my fin mane folding back with the pressure, and I felt my tail trailing along behind me. And I realized swimming was really easy. It was so effortless. I barely used any strength. I understood how fast I could go. I tried to swim even faster. I pawed at the water anxiously, like I was in a hurry. I started paddling very hard, and I started going very fast. Very, very fast. The seafloor was a blur. The feel of the water on my face started feeling like I was looking up from underneath a waterfall. And it was fun. Oh my, it was fun. It felt so surreal and comfortable, yet so thrilling, like one of those flying dreams I would always have. I really was flying through the ocean. The cool water was just the right temperature, and the currents just felt like a nice breeze. And I wanted to go even faster. So I started lunging with all my strength and all of my limbs. I wanted to see just how fast I could go. I wanted to know what the limit was. What happened next was... well, I found my answer, I think. I remember that I was watching the sea floor and trying to follow it down, so I could understand just how fast I was swimming. But then, everything I saw stopped making sense to me. I was swimming so fast that I could only see the shapes of things, and I couldn't quite understand what they were. It was like I was falling. I was falling sideways through the sea. I found that I could change directions as easily as giving a small twitch of my tail or a paddle of my paws. At one point, I saw a rock coming right for me, sticking out of the sand down below. I flicked with my right paws, then with my left paws, and then the rock was just behind me. Just like that, I swam around it. What amazing agility! I tried going in other directions. I tried swimming straight back to the surface, but I turned just before I hit the air, and I went back down. It was all so easy. I tried swimming in circles and big knots, and it was all so easy. I never got tired, and I never ran out of breath. I was unstoppable. But eventually I snap out of it, and I realize I have no idea how far away from shore I was, or what directions I had been swimming. The seafloor had dropped down so far that I couldn't see it anymore. I felt just a little worried, so I stopped myself. I stopped paddling, and I guess I turned my body sideways a little, and I slowed down until I didn't move anymore. And for a moment, I thought I was completely lost in the ocean. But Lynn was right there beside me. He had followed me the whole way. He looks really happy for me. He swims above me, and he looks down, and he says, "Very good, Jasmine. Congratulations on your transmutation." I asked what a transmutation was, and he showed me. He started swimming around me, striding with his legs, but then he suddenly disappeared. I gasped when I saw it. He really disappeared. He really turned into a stream of mist and bubbles. I watched the stream flow around me so fast. Then he appeared again where the stream stopped. I saw him smile at me, and I realized I did the same thing. I turned into a stream of bubbles too. That's how I was swimming so fast. He says, "When you come in contact with the water, you can become like the water. When you do, you will still feel whole, and you will still feel as though you have control of your body. But in fact, you are a living current, hidden from the eye of onlookers, flowing effortlessly wherever you choose. Few water types have this ability, and you and I are among them. It is unexplainable, but unexplainably wonderful, is it not?" Yeah, it was wonderful. My heart was racing. I wanted to do it again. But he didn't let me. He asked me to follow him back to shore, so I did. It took a while. I'd gone almost half a mile after I turned into water. A few times, he let me turn into water again on the way back to shore, as long as I followed him. When I stepped back on the beach, I felt hot and dry, and I didn't have to shake. The water just fell off me and I was dry. But I didn't want to be dry anymore. I just wanted to turn around and go back. I asked Lynn how long a Vaporeon can stay in the water before they need to come out. He laughs and says, "Wrong question, Jasmine, but I'll answer it anyway. Indefinitely. A Vaporeon never needs to leave the water. Now, can you think of the correct question?" I shiver when I hear that I can just stay in the water forever. Forever. It's like I don't even know what's under there. It still stood dull and empty to me. But I just wanted to be down there because it was so comfortable. It was like that feeling I would get when it would be cold and snowing outside the den, but Grandma would let me snuggle next to her and be warm. I felt like that when I was swimming in the ocean and turning into water. Then I ask how long a Vaporeon can stay on land before they need to get back into the water. Lynn nods and says, "Very good. The answer depends on how much water you hold in your soul. If your soul is empty, then you can survive without water for about 9 days. If your soul is full, then significantly longer, perhaps 30 days or more. But when you are on land, it is important to always know where the closest body of water is, and to drink fluids whenever you can. Around here in the port town, that's not difficult. You can always rely on the sea to be there." As I'm walking on the shore and getting sand all over my paws, I still feel like I'm swimming. I feel like the sand is moving underneath me. I turn back and look at the ocean. I really wished I could just go back and keep swimming. But the thinking side of my mind didn't want to get lost, especially after the sun went down and the sea would be so dark. Lynn turns to look at the ocean with me, and he says, "Now can you see that I did not lie to you?" I say yes. He was right, and I was sorry for yelling at him. He says, "You are free now. You have a choice. You could, if you wanted, run back out to the sea, run away from me, and Brunt, and all of Port Naw, and disappear, never to be seen again. No one could find you, and no net could hold you. But if you so choose, instead, maybe you could go back to Brunt's residence, and sleep there for the night, and meet me here tomorrow, so I can teach you more." Of course I told him that I would meet him. He walked back to the house with me and made sure I could get in. Then we parted ways for the evening. I looked out over the ocean before I went in the house. The sun was setting again, and it was so gorgeous. I realized that I was a fish fox, and that I would never be anything else. But I realized that I didn't want to be anything else anymore. Being a fish fox was fine, so far at least. When I slept that night, I didn't dream of the forest anymore. I dreamed of flying around in the ocean and turning into water. I went swimming with Lynn for 2 more days, and he showed me a few more things about being a Vaporeon. He showed me how to use the water I had taken into my soul and use it to attack enemies. I could spit it back out, very powerfully if I wanted. He also taught me how to use my speed to jump out of the water and very high into the air. Brunt came back after 3 days, just like Lynn said, and Lynn was going to disappear in the ocean again. On the last day, I begged him to stay. I said that I wanted to learn more about swimming and how the ocean works. But he just stood there on the shoreline and smiled at me one more time, and he said, "There is only so much I can teach you about the sea, Jasmine. If you want to learn more, you will need to discover it for yourself. Let your instincts guide you. You have good instincts. They won't lead you wrong." And then he just left. He walked into the ocean, and he was gone. I didn't see him again for a long time. So Brunt and I got to start a new shipment right away. This time, I was much more prepared. He had a big crowd of monsters lift all the metal crates and load them onto the cargo space on Keldeo. Then I dove down into the water, underneath the boat. It went down so far, and I found all the latches for the anchor cables, and I detached them all on the first try. Then I got back onto the boat, and we set sail. I remember I was sitting on the deck of Keldeo, and I actually felt happy. The boat bobbed up and down in the water, and it reminded me of when I was in there. And I was finally starting to like the smell of salt, and the way the wind would always blow it from the ocean, and just everything. Brunt is moving the wheel, which steers the boat, and he seems awkward, like he didn't like to talk to me very much. But he asks me if I feel better about being a Vaporeon. I just say yes. I feel alright about it. Then he says, I'm really sorry for chucking you off into the water. That's what my dad did to me, and it worked fine. Instincts kicked right in. So, I thought it would be the same for you. I tell him it's alright. I forgive him. He says, I won't lie. You had me real worried there. I thought I lost you. I thought my Eon Stone and my new partner was just gonna disappear into the mist after doing that. Thought for sure I'd come back to shore and you'd just be gone. So for the 3 days I sailed, it felt like Keldeo and I were sailing through the tides of my own shame. Then he leaves the wheel and comes back to the deck where I am, and he sits on the chest and looks at me. He says, because I learned a long time ago that being friends with a Vaporeon is all about being able to stand one another. I need to be someone you enjoy being around. I need to be the reason you get on this ship whenever I need you, because if I'm not, anytime at all, you could just... And he waved at the ocean. I asked him if Lynn ever did that to him. Once or twice, maybe. But I guess I was doing something right, because he always came back eventually. I like to think we parted on good terms when he retired. He answers my messages, so I suppose we did something right. Just promise me something, Jasmine. If you ever want to disappear, let me know ahead of time, alright? Just so I can prepare myself. Maybe send for one of my nephews to give me a hand. I promised him I would. After he said that, he went back to the wheel to steer some more. I didn't really understand how the boat knew which direction to go from the wheel. I thought maybe it was one of those unexplainable things that Lynn told me about. So I just went to the edge of the boat and watched the water. I watched the big white waves that the boat made, and I realized that the boat was going very fast. I wanted to ask Brunt if I could jump off the boat and swim around for a while. I wanted to see if I could turn into water and keep up with the boat. But I decided not to, because I didn't want to be rude. I didn't want Brunt to think I wanted to disappear into the ocean, so I stayed. The whole ride was relaxing. The gulls started disappearing when we sailed far from the shore. Sometimes I could see other boats in the distance. At night, I could see the sun go down over the ocean. It would always turn into colors I never knew the sun could turn into. And at night, I could stay up on the deck with Brunt and watch the stars. I'd never seen so many stars in the sky before. In the forest, there were always trees or hills blocking the view. But on Keldeo, it's like I saw all the stars. Grandpa once told me that there were more stars in the sky than creatures on the earth. I never forgot that. Even though I thought I could see every star in the sky on the nights I sailed with Brunt, I remembered that there were even more stars that I couldn't see. I knew it was one of those unexplainable things. One day I was sitting on the back of the deck. My eyes were half closed. I was letting myself be hypnotized by the sounds of the waves and wishing I was down there. I thought I felt myself getting thirsty. I wondered if my soul was running dry, like Lynn said. But then Brunt jumps from the wheels and shouts, "We're here!" And he gets very happy and excited. I jump up and I start peering over the sides of the boat in every direction, but I don't see any land. I just see the water. Brunt says, "Overboard you go, dear. Latch onto the anchors and open the hangar. We've got a delivery to make." At first I thought he was crazy, but then I noticed buoys floating in the water. They were the same kind that were at Port Craw that held Keldeo to the pier. I don't understand what's going on, but he doesn't have to ask me twice to jump off. I squeal for joy and I dive down into the water. It was like I never had a fear of heights at all. I start splashing and playing around in the water because I'm so happy to be there again. And Brunt unravels the anchor cables for me to latch. Once I'm done, I tread water at the surface and wait for Brunt's instructions. He tells me to meet him below the boat. I still didn't understand, but I dove down below the hull. Again, it went so far down. And I waited. Then something really weird happened. The bottom of the boat was opening. I thought it was going to let the water in and make the boat sink, but there was air. I swam for the air and I popped out and I realized I was looking at the cargo bay of the boat, still filled with metal boxes and all kinds of weird things. And Brunt standing there looking very proud. He comes to me and he says, "Keldeo's a ScytheRider-class vessel, equipped with an airlock and a primary loading bay at the bottom of the hull itself. Specializes in undersea deliveries. Come on, this is your time to shine, Jasmine. You've got to help me get all this stuff down." So I helped Brunt push the nearest bundle of stuff into the water. It's very heavy and it didn't feel like I was doing any of the work, and it made a huge splash and it hit the water and started to sink. I dive in after it, and to my surprise, I find it's much lighter in the water than it was in the ship. I find that I just let it rest on my back, and if I did that, I could hold it with no problem. But still, undersea deliveries? I wasn't sure what was going on. So I just followed Brunt. He's also got a big bundle of cargo, but he has it attached to a rope, and he's dragging it down through the water. I start following him before long, and I realize that there are fish here with us. There are a few different kinds. Some were orange, some were yellow, and some were gray. They were all swimming up to Keldeo. I noticed that Brunt was saying something to one of the fish. Then one of them swam past me and said hi, and wished me a good day. I was so surprised that I almost dropped my cargo. They were talking fish. Some of them were the same kinds of fish that Brunt had in his freeze box. Some of them were the same kind our family would roast over the fire and cook with chives. But they were talking. I had no idea fish could be civil. I started wondering, could they read and learn like land creatures could? Could they build things? I had my answer as soon as I saw the ocean floor. It was a city. It was a whole city at the bottom of the ocean. There were buildings and caves and weird plants everywhere. There were many lights of all different colors. Fish and water snakes and creatures were swimming around everywhere. It was just as busy as Port Craw. Brunt swims near me and says, "Welcome to Crawdon Reef, my dear. Port Craw and Crawdon Reef are sister cities. It's where the land and sea connect. All the watermons in the sea come here to hear the news of the land, and likewise in Port Craw with the sea. And they rely on us to bring them merchandise that they can't get anywhere down here. Today we've got several tons of berries to deliver. They're a real delicacy down here." I hear what he says, but I can't say anything. I was just so mesmerized by the city. He laughs and says, "You want to explore, do you? Tell you what, help me get all these berries down into the warehouse, and when you're done, I'll let you explore all you want, all right?" So I was patient, and I did my job. I lost count, but I think it was about 20 trips up and down and up, all the way from the surface of the ocean to the bottom. I was starting to get tired because the loads were so heavy, but I kept thinking of touring the town when I was done, and all the new things I could see. And after we got the last stack of boxes down into the waterhouse, Brunt says to me, "Well, I need to go up and get some air. Unlike some of you other mons, I can't stay down here forever. So I'll have a little fun and walk around, eh? Tell me if you find anything you want to trade for, and I'll buy it for you. Just, be back up in a few hours, alright?" As soon as I got permission to go, it felt like all my energy came back. I turned into water and swam all through the town as fast as I could. I almost ran into the fish that were swimming everywhere, but I was so agile that I just curved around them. The whole town was built into the reef. The reef was this giant stickle bush that looked like it was made of rocks, and there were lots of gaps inside for the fish people to build things and make homes. I met very many new kinds of creatures that day. I even got to talk to some of the Corsella fish and beautiful Milotic snakes. They were very nice and welcomed me to the reef. They asked if I was living here, and I told them no, I was just visiting. But it made me start wondering why I couldn't just live here anyway. It seemed like an awesome place for me. And it was just amazing because I kept swimming around and I couldn't find the end of the reef. There were just more and more fish and plants and underwater buildings. It was bigger than Port Craw for sure. I remember trying to see it all, and how pretty it was glowing in all the different colored lights they had. I don't exactly remember how I got to the abyss. I think I just kept following the reef, and I stopped to realize that the city part of the reef was gone, that there were just wild fish and no more houses. But I didn't know how far back they had ended. I remember I stopped when I saw this giant dark chasm open up in front of me, and I wanted to go down and explore it. The fox part of me still really liked the dark. The dark was when the predators couldn't see me, so I wanted to dive down and explore the abyss. It was like going down into my den. It made me feel real safe. And I guess I was a little overconfident too. I just thought nothing could ever catch me because I could just turn into water and swim away. And I was so curious, I just kept going down into the dark. It started getting very, very cold, but I didn't mind. I liked the cold. It was only a little uncomfortable when I really got down there. I felt that there were treasures in the dark. Maybe I was going to find the true bottom of the ocean, and there would be special treasures down there that no other sea monster could find but me. To my surprise, I found that I wasn't alone. There were some very weird creatures living down there in the dark and the cold. I saw a few eels and some starfish, but they ignored me, so I wasn't scared. I kept following the abyss wall and searching for interesting things. Then I saw a new kind of creature, one I didn't see when I was exploring the reef. It was a blue fish, kinda small. It didn't look very intimidating to me, especially not after I had just spoken face to face with some giant dragon serpents earlier. But the interesting thing was, this fish was using light to guide its way. The light was coming from itself. I swam closer and I saw that the light was attached to its own fin. It was just like some of the glow lights that the city used, but this one was attached to the fish from its back fin, hanging down in front of its face. And I just thought it was adorable. So I swam closer. I wanted to see if it was a talking fish. Maybe it was using a lamplight it brought from the city. As soon as it saw me, I felt fear for the first time. My instincts were telling me that I made a great big mistake, because it thought that I was an enemy. It started scowling at me and swam closer, like a predator, just like a hungry hound or a raptor flying in the sky would. Then it created lightning. The lightning struck me and I felt hot, like I had fallen into a fire. It hurt so much. But the fish did it again. It swam closer and shocked me with lightning. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't turn into water and I couldn't scream. The lightning made my muscles stop working. And I saw more fish of the same kind. They were swimming behind the first one, but they weren't using their lights. When they saw me, they all lit their lights up, and they swam up to me, and they just kept attacking me with shocks. It hurt so much, I hate to remember it. It felt like there were icicles sticking into me, except they were hot and cold at the same time. I really thought I was going to die, and I couldn't fight it. I couldn't even move at all. Those anglerfish just kept hitting me with lightning, and I just let it happen. It hurt so much that I fell asleep. When I woke up, my mouth was full of sand, and I wasn't underwater anymore. I really didn't know where I was, and I was scared. I'd gotten used to waking up in Brunt's basket, or in the cabin, or Caldeo, but I woke up in the middle of the sand, and I knew that I wasn't where I was supposed to be. I spit out all the sand and I looked around myself. I found that, well, I'm on a beach. But I can't see Port Craw anywhere. All I see are trees. There's a forest past the beach, no cities. There wasn't any nature in Port Craw. Then I realized this wasn't the same beach at all. I didn't know where I was. I was lost. I look over the ocean and I don't see anything. I try to call to Brunt and Lynn, but they aren't there. I didn't want to believe I was lost. I thought I just drifted down the shore for a while, but then I remembered how far away from land I was. I was out in a reef that was a few days away from the land, and I remembered the abyss and the lightning fish. At this point I start to panic. I understand what happened. I realize that I drifted in the ocean for a long time, and the high tide probably put me onto the beach. I knew I could go back into the water and swim away, but I didn't know which direction to go. I didn't know which direction would take me to Port Craw or the reef. And I began to fear the ocean again. Even though I was a fish fox, and I could swim and turn into water, I feel terrified of the ocean again. I remember that the ocean is as big as the sky. For all I knew, I could swim straight in one direction and never see anything else for as long as I live. The ocean was so big, and I was alone, and that really scared me. I start running toward the forest. I want to see if there are any civilized people around that could help me. I hear birds singing songs I don't recognize and animals calling to one another. It's all wilderness. But I start jumping through the trees and plants, trying to find someone to answer my questions. And then I find that I can't run well anymore. All those years that Grandpa told me to run and keep my legs in shape didn't mean anything anymore. My tail keeps hitting trees and scraping on bushes. My paws don't dig into the ground very well. Even the fins on my head keep hitting things and getting scratched. And then I try to jump onto a fallen tree, but I slip off and my face goes forward and hits a rock. I screeched so loud, and I laid there for a long time waiting for the pain to go away. I realized a little late that my forehead was bleeding. But my blood isn't red anymore. It's blue. I curled up and put my paws on the wound, and I just started sobbing. All I felt right then was that I wanted Grandma and Grandpa back to lick my forehead and make it heal. The pain went away in a while, but I knew I couldn't stay in one place. That's one thing Grandpa told me about the forest. Never stay in one place for too long. So I remember which direction goes back to the ocean, and I start to explore. The forest was more like a jungle the further I went in. There were plants and nasty thorns on them, and bright colorful flowers that smelled like poison. And I saw a few creatures. One of them was much larger than me, and it had blue fur, and it looked like there was lightning on its fur. I ran away from it so fast, scraping my poor fishtail on the branches the whole way. When I got closer to the ocean where the forest was less thick, I decided that I would try to survive on my own. The first thing I needed to do was make a den, somewhere where I could sleep that night without predators attacking me. So I started looking around for somewhere that could be my home. I wandered somewhere that at least looked like the home I once had, something with water where I could take baths, nearby berry bushes, for eating and healing. Good shade from the trees. I carefully crawled around in the forest for somewhere like that. I found a place that was all right. It was next to a river. There was a fruit tree, and it grew these fruits that I saw on them selling in the market at Port Craw. I started nosing around for somewhere I could dig a small den, just something big enough to fit into, so I could sleep safely at night. And I saw the night was coming. I kind of made one, I guess. It wasn't a very good one. I wasn't good at digging. I had to spit water at the dirt to make it softer, so the den was all muddy, but I didn't really care. I got there before nightfall, and I slept as well as I could, as long as I didn't remember I was alone. And I stayed there in the forest for a few days. I honestly started to think that it might have been my new life. I started gathering fruit. I tried hunting some rats, but I was terrible at hunting now that I was a giant fish, so I just collected even more berries. And the river kept me from going thirsty. I think it may have been unsalted water, which made my thirst go away so much more. Things didn't really change for me much until the fourth night, when I decided, if I was going to live here on this faraway beach from now on, I would make it as much like home as I could. And there was one thing I always remembered about the den back home that I would never forget. It was that one rock that cast a shadow onto the river and told us when it was time to go to sleep. I wanted something like that. Well, I wasn't good at carrying huge rocks, so I just made a bundle of thin logs and buried them into the mud next to the river. They cast shadows, so I figured they would work. Then I explored my territory and tried to find more supplies that could help me build the den. I thought maybe I could find some giant spiders and use their silk to make rope, or maybe some good rocks that would make nice claw spades to help me dig. But then I saw that the sun was going down, and rushed back home to see the shadow touch the water for the first time. And I came home to find that the shadow wasn't even close to the water. It was pointed in the wrong direction. I thought that was so weird. I didn't understand it. I'd set up the river and the poles in the same places that Grandpa had them. I waited to see what would happen, but it just got dark and the shadows disappeared. So I went into my sloppy den and waited until the next day. The next day I got a pile of berries and I sat in front of the poles, and I watched it all evening. I watched the shadow go from the poles into the same wrong direction. It missed the river completely. I was so confused. I started to think that this was just another one of those unexplainable things. But I didn't think it was. Shadows were easy to explain. Things block the light and create shadows. That's simple. So as I'm thinking about this, I take one of my poles in my mouth and I run out to the beach with it. I stick it into the sand to see what would happen. It creates a very long shadow, just like I do. The shadow points away from the sun, I realize. Well, that makes sense, it's blocking the sunlight. So, if the pole blocks the sunlight, why doesn't the shadow touch the river? I walked around and watched my own shadow. I realized that the shadow always pointed the same direction, away from the sun. The sun was setting on the end of the beach, and the shadow was pointed sideways along the shore. Grandpa's rock always cast a shadow away from the sun when it was setting. That means the sun sets in the same part of the sky every night. I think it was something I always knew, but never really thought hard enough about. But I stood there on the beach. I looked at the sun, and I realized why the rock's shadow would always touch the riverbank at night, because the sun always set in the same place. Just like it always set over the seaside at Port Craw. That's when I knew how to get home. I had to swim away from the sunset, because that's the direction we sailed on the boat. If I wanted to go back to Port Craw, I had to swim towards the sunrise. So I spent one last night in my pathetic little den, and as soon as I woke up, I ate berries until I was full, and then I ran out into the ocean and I followed the morning sun. And when the beach ended, I just ran into the water, and then I turned into water. Grandpa told us once that he ran a very long way in a single day to find our eggs. That's what I felt when I was following the sun. I swam so fast that I thought I could see the water making room for me. I didn't let anything hold me back. The waves and the currents were all just too weak compared to me. It didn't matter which way the water went. I went forward, and I didn't let the water change that. And the amazing thing is that I never got tired. Running through the forest would always make my legs sore and made me pant hard. But swimming didn't do that. I wondered how long I would have to go before I really started to get exhausted. At some time I decided to swim deeper so I could look for the reef, and I start seeing some fish near the bottom of the sea. When I see them, I just stop swimming, and I look at them. Of course, they're not intelligent fish, so they don't talk to me or anything. They just swim away. But I understood something else just then. Fish never rest. They're always swimming. They never have to stop to sleep on the ground. They swim forever. The water supports them. And when I realized that, I understood Lynn when he said that I could stay underwater indefinitely. He really did mean it. I could stay underwater forever. I would never get tired of swimming. I would never rest. Never need to. Ever. I just laughed at myself. I laughed just because I was a fish and because the water liked me. I was born a fox, but my body adapted to the water, and I would never need another home. I would never need to go back. Except that I remembered the comet, the one that would come sometime during my life. I knew I couldn't get too lost in the ocean. I needed to know how to get back home to see my family when it came time. So I turned into water again and I kept swimming toward the sunrise. I think I swam through a storm. The water tried very hard to shove me around, and I heard thunder. But I wasn't scared anymore. The water liked me. I knew it would keep me safe. I just kept swimming forward and the lightning never touched me. I don't know how long or how far I swam, but I knew when I found the reef. I was so happy to see something I recognized, but most of all, I was happy that I wasn't weak anymore. I had made it all the way back, all on my own. I was strong and free, just like Lynn promised I would be. I started to look around for the city and the reef, and this anglerfish swims up to me. At first I'm terrified. I didn't want to get hit by lightning again. But then it talked. It was a civilized fish. It said, "Excuse me, are you Jasmine?" I almost forgot my name. I hadn't heard it in so long. I said, "Yeah, that's me." The anglerfish said, "Jasmine, you were reported missing by some of your friends. Would you like me to tell them that you're okay?" I told the fish that I wanted to see my friends as soon as I could. It told me that they were probably at Port Craw. It asked me if I would like to have some escorts to take me back there. I thanked him, but I said no, and I swam away. Escorts would be too slow, and besides, I wasn't tired. I remember how excited I got when the ocean floor started sloping up. I knew the land was coming. I used a trick that Lynn taught me, and I swam right up into the air and I jumped very high over the surface of the ocean. Before I fell back down, I could see the shores of Port Craw. I could see the beach, the long and tall piers, and the boats that were next to them. I could even see the cliff that Brunt took me on top of during my first day in the city. And I could see the tall buildings where all the land creatures lived. It was the city where they came from all over the land to connect with the reef and hear news about the ocean. I was so happy. I felt like I was home. I kept jumping over the water just because it felt so fun. And then I made it to the shore, and I found that Lynn was standing right there. He was very surprised to see me. He said he was just watching the ocean and wondering where I had been. I wasn't even all the way out of the water before I started blurting everything that happened. I don't even think he listened to me. He was just happy to see me. Lynn says to me, "At first I was not worried for you. I thought you had begun your submersion. It's a natural behavior for the newly formed Vaporeon to vanish beneath the waves, but Brunt didn't agree with me. He was very worried. He told me that you promised you wouldn't leave him without telling him first. So I took his word for things, and I reported you missing." "Submersion? What do you mean?" I say. He looks at the ocean, and I see the sunset reflecting off his eyes, making them look red and yellow. He says, "When a Vaporeon first discovers the ocean, they will tend to vanish, and spend a very long period of time becoming accustomed to life underwater. They become so immersed that they forget for a time that land exists at all. Normally you will grow out of it, but it can last for a long while. For instance, my submersion lasted for 18 years. I thought about staying underwater for 18 years, and it made me shiver, but not in a bad way. Lynn said, "Jasmine, it might be coming time for your own submission to begin. When it does, I suggest coming to dwell in Crawdaunt Reef. It is the greatest underwater city in the world, and you would have everything your soul would desire. And all the while, you could continue to help my old friend with his business." And I just scampered up to Lynn, and I hugged him like I would always hug Grandma or Grandpa when I was very happy to see them. I put my paw around his neck, and I put my nuzzle under his chin, and I thanked him for everything he did for me. And that was the story of how I became a fish. I stayed around in the city, and I was very happy during my time here. I helped Brunt once a week take his Caldeo to the reef and bring things to the underwater city, and he paid me by buying me things from the market. One time he even let me make one of those fake fossil prints, and he put my name on it, and he set it on the hearth right next to Lynn's. I didn't see much of Lynn anymore, but I still found him on the beach a few times a year, and I got to talk with him. I wanted to talk to him even more, but I could never seem to find him when I wanted. But I guess he was just happy swimming wherever he wanted all the time. As for me, I spent a whole week dictating this story to Brunt. I know I didn't have to, but I wanted to have my story written down somewhere so I wouldn't forget it when the comet comes. I wonder where that comet is, anyway. The astronomers don't know anything about it, and I've already been living here for 6 years. But I feel something inside of me. I want to submerge. It was just like Lynn said. I really want to go underneath the ocean and live there for a very long time. And I think I'm going to start tomorrow. I can't wait any longer. It's just so exciting thinking of living in the reef. So I'm getting this story down in paper, because I don't know what's going to happen to me now. At this time tomorrow, I might just be a jet of water flying around in the coral without a care in the world. I miss my family, of course. I dream about them sometimes. But Grandpa always said there was a whole world out beyond the forest that we could see one day. I got to see the ocean, and I think I would miss it too if it were taken away. I'm a very happy fish, so I guess my evolution was good. My change was for the better. I just wonder if the rest of my brothers and sisters are doing all right. This is my goodbye to the world of the surface. I was raised on the surface, but now there's somewhere else I belong. Somewhere bigger. After all this time, that's still the only thing I know about the ocean, that it's big, and that I've barely seen any of it. And when I die, it'll still be the same way, but at least I can say that I was there, and that I was a part of it.